Hi, everybody, and welcome to this How Good webinar. We're just giving a couple of minutes for everybody to join. I hope you're doing great. And yeah, we're going to start in the next seconds or so. Thank you for everyone for joining. If you'd like to introduce yourself, feel free to use the chat function for that and share some information about yourself, your LinkedIn profile. And also during the course of the webinar, if you have any questions, also feel free to write them in the chat. And we're going to make sure we have some time at the end for Q&A and for some conversation about the topic today. So with that said, I'm going to kick us off. So again, welcome to the How Good webinar from CSR to ROI on the business case of sustainability. Before we formally start, just to introduce a little bit about myself, my name is João. I'm a Portuguese citizen living in Brazil, and I'm also a dancer and agroforestry coffee farmer based in Brazil. And you can see here on the right-hand side, pruning a banana tree. And in addition of both being a dancer and an agroforestry coffee farmer, where I grow, both coffee with 50 different species of aromatic herbs, stingless native bees, and ladybugs that we use to control for aphids. I'm also Director of Growth and Innovation at How Good. And in the rare chance that you don't know what How Good is a SaaS platform with one of the world's largest databases on food product sustainability. Our platform helps food and agricultural companies view the impact of any ingredient from any origin and sourcing standard. And really our focus is really empowering strategic sustainability decision-making. We've been around for the last 16 years, mapping global supply systems. And we created a database that draws from over 600 different data sources to assess over 33,000 different ingredients across over 200 sustainability metrics. So you can see that the platform and the database is quite big. In terms of agenda for today, we're going to have the session divided in 3 parts. The first part is really a conversation about sustainability and food systems. If we're talking about what is the business case of sustainability, let's start by grounding ourselves on what is sustainability. And we're going to think about what is sustainability using a planetary perspective, like an astronaut. And you'll see what I mean by these in just a few minutes. Then we're going to really focus on the content of the webinar today, what you're joining the webinar for, which is really the business case of sustainability. And how can we start to think about framing a business case that will enable your board, your executive team to hopefully invest boldly in the sustainability initiatives that we so desperately need. And third, we're going to finish by actually questioning the business case and really taking notice to think about what paradigms are we holding when we ask this question? And how can we perhaps think more broadly and more holistically about sustainability in ways that allow us to see and materialize new potential? So yeah, it's quite of an ambitious agenda. And I thank you again for those who've just joined for joining How Good for the next hour or so. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. So let's start with part 1. And I want to invite you to take notice just for a second that this is you and that whatever you do has an impact in your company, what your company does has an impact in your company's customers, that your customers impact the industry, and the industry definitely has an impact on the planet Earth. And I want to invite us to start there with that planetary view of sustainability. I don't know if any of you is familiar with this photograph. This is one of my personal favorite photographs. If you are familiar, make sure you write in the chat. But this picture is called the pale blue dot. And this was a photograph that was taken in 1990, the year I was born, by NASA's Voyager 1, So when Voyager was about to leave the solar system, Carl Jung asked NASA to take one last picture, to turn the camera of Voyager and take one last picture of planet Earth at the edge of the solar system. And this was what that picture captured. And that pale blue dot is us. And everything we know, everyone we know, all the memories we have are basically that pale blue dot. And so if we zoom in that immensity of the dark space into that specific planet, there is another picture that I also love. And this picture is called the Earthrise. So this picture was taken when and the astronaut William Anders was orbiting the moon surface prior, this was before the moon landing. They were orbiting the moon and they took one picture of the Earth. And some people describe this photograph as one of the most influential environmental photographs ever taken, because it was one of the first times that actually we could see how the Earth looks from space. And look, and just take a moment to notice how beautiful and gorgeous she is. Now, the issue is, Earth's life support systems are at risk. In 2009, there was a group of many renowned scientists that were invited by the Stockholm Resilience Center to identify the processes that regulate the stability of the Earth system and really its ability to sustain life, human life, and all types of life in our planet. And these scientists proposed a series of planetary boundaries within which we can continue to thrive and develop for generations to come. These planetary boundaries, you can see them here in this image. They're connected to freshwater change, the stratospheric ozone depletion, aerosol loading, ocean acidification, biogeochemical flows connected to nitrogen and phosphorus, novel entities, land system change, the integrity of the biosphere, and climate change. And as of today, 6 of these planetary boundaries have already been crossed, which really speak to the urgency for us to take action on sustainability or really face significant risks for our own ability to sustain our own life and the life of the future generations on the planet. And agriculture, How Good is really focused on agriculture and food systems. And what we know is that agriculture is very much linked to these support systems. So 46% of all habitable land is used for agriculture. 73% of deforestation, which is the main driver of biodiversity loss, is driven by agriculture. 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions are associated with the food production, and some estimates even say it's even higher. And 70% of all the withdrawals of fresh water that we do them for agriculture. But it's not just agriculture in general. Animal husbandry has a significant share of the impact associated with these metrics. So take notice that 77% of all land used for agriculture is used to grow livestock. 96% of all the global mammal biomass, excluding humans, is livestock. 53% of the emissions within the food system, come from livestock, and 29% of the freshwater changes are associated with livestock. So agriculture and animal agriculture specifically are a big part of the issue. But the beautiful thing about agriculture is that it also has the potential to be part of the solution and to be a drawdown and to reverse a lot of these sustainability metrics and become an instrument for the regeneration of the planet. So with that said, it's not just important, but it's both important and urgent for us to find ways to articulate narratives that are compelling enough for companies and the private sector to invest boldly in sustainability in the spirit of SDG 17, that really says that it requires a partnership across all sectors to drive meaningful developmental outcomes. And today we're presenting a framework that you can use. The reason why we're sharing a framework is because we don't think there is a formula or a recipe that you can, just copy paste and that is going to work for your company. The reason why we're using a framework, it's because your company is unique, your customer is unique, you work in unique landscapes, you sell unique products, and the framework is there to help you visualize maybe a unique way for you to craft your own business case. So this framework is called the 4 Pillars of Value and was adapted by the Sustainability Business Case by Andrew Winston. And basically the idea is that there are only so many ways that we can create value. The first way we can look at this is by looking at, either increasing the upside, so meaning that we're increasing prices, selling more of sustainable products, or reducing the downside, really reducing the costs that we have to face or the risks that are affecting our business. And the other way we can look at this is by looking at what are the forms of the value that is tangible. So what are the things that can be easily be measured and quantified versus the things that are intangible, that are really connected to uncertainty. So here on the side of what are ways for us to reduce the downside in ways that are tangible, that's really focused on costs, right? So how is it that sustainability initiatives can reduce costs? And this is probably where here at How Good we see the big part of the focus of the sustainability business cases that we see are focused on how can sustainability reduce costs. And there are 2 big categories that we see. The first one is resource efficiency, making them more efficient of the resources we have. And the other one is, are there ways for us to pay less for the resources that we're using? Or for example, is there a way for us to shift from one resource to another and doing so in a way that will also allow us to save costs? Now, the other way we have to look at this is in terms of revenues. So how can sustainability grow revenue? And if revenue is simply, price multiplied by quantity sold, there are 2 big buckets that we can look at here. The first one is, can I use sustainability to sell more sustainable products or to get a bigger market share of the market that I'm selling to? Or can I use sustainability to hopefully charge a price premium for the products that I'm selling? So the 1 and 2 is really where usually a lot of the focus is. Now, during the presentation today, and I think the value of this framework is really helping us to articulate a business case that is more holistic, that is not just focused on what's tangible, but also into the things that sometimes are more difficult to measure. So the first one is is in terms of what are the intangibles that affect our downside? And this is basically the risks. So how can sustainability mitigate risks that might impact our future revenue? How can sustainability, for example, maintain our license to operate or ensure that we're going to have a resilient supply of resources to operate our business, or how it will ensure that we have lower volatility of the costs for the inputs that we use for our raw materials? And the last one is the upside and the intangible, right? So how can sustainability improve the upside of what's intangible? And that's really kind of where we go into the differentiators. And so usually this means things that will impact our ability to generate revenue, but often things that are hard to measure and maybe don't show up in a company's book value, but definitely explain a lot of the company's market value. This includes things such as, the company's ability to attract and retain talent because it has a sustainability mission, the ability to create products that connect to sustainability needs or sustainability preferences that consumers have, or the ability to generate a loyal customer base because of sustainability commitments. So here in this framework, you see here on the tangible side, these are all the things that are tangible and that can usually be measured in the book value. So this includes like building, equipment, revenues, costs, cash and bonds, inventory and land. And here on the right-hand side, you see all the intangibles. This includes things such as patents and the brand value and the customer data and different types of software that sometimes do not show up in the company's book value, but they explain a big part of the market value. Now, I'll invite you to think for a second, in the last month or so, when you've had to make a business case for sustainability, which of the pillars of value have you been relying most on? Was it costs? Was it revenues? Was it risks? Or was it differentiators? And if you want, you can, put in the chat what some of those are. So you just need to, just write kind of, 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 or 1 and 4. So we have some people mentioning that they've been focusing on the differentiators, some people, which is great. Some people mentioning revenues, costs. And so thank you for sharing. It's great to see that we're, collectively we're articulating the business case in many different ways. One of the things that I find interesting is a research that was done recently and that was done during the last years by Ocean Tomo. And one of the things that they found out was that the value of intangibles has changed dramatically over the last years. In 1975, when you looked at the S&P 500's market value, 17% was driven by intangible assets and 83% was driven by their tangible assets, right? So their buildings, their equipments, their cash, their bonds. And now you fast track to 2020, and there is a difference between the company's market value and the company book value, and that difference accounts for the intangibles. And those intangibles in 2020 represent 90% of the S&P's market value. And so if we take this insight into how we're framing the business case, relying too much on only what's tangible can mean that we're missing an opportunity to 10x our sustainability business case by also articulating narratives and messages that focus on how sustainability can reduce risks and drive what makes our business different. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking into each of those 4 buckets. And I'm going to share with you a couple of examples on how different companies and how different industries have assessed the making of a business case within that sector, to give you some examples and hopefully some inspiration and maybe some data that you can use for your next meeting with your C-suite or your board. So starting with how sustainability can reduce costs. One of the most compelling arguments for this actually comes by looking at the cost of energy. When we look at this study from the International Renewable Energy Agency, we see that the cost of renewables has dropped 84% in the last 10 years. And renewables are today the cheapest form of power. And so today, whenever you're making a decision about energy generation, it's very likely that renewable is not only going to be a much superior source from a sustainability perspective for power generation, but it will also be associated with significant cost savings. And you can see in this graph, these black bold lines are the ranges of the fossil fuel prices. And you can see that there are many forms of renewable energy that in 2021 already had an average cost below the minimum price for fossil fuels. And this is true for onshore wind, this is true for hydropower, and this is true for solar photovoltaics. So this is one area where basically there is a strong win-win between sustainability and cost savings. But one of the big issues with sustainability, when we look at resource efficiency, is that companies do not pay, and we as consumers and as households, we often do not pay the true costs of the resources we're using. Often we don't pay for the carbon we're emitting. Often we don't pay for the true cost of water that we source. And because of that, what we're also seeing is a growing number of companies setting internal prices, both on carbon and on resources such as water. And so what these means is even in cases where maybe your cost doesn't reflect the true cost of that resource, you're able to set up an internal price to drive the incentives from an internal perspective to search for those efficiencies. Because in the end, it's very difficult to create an incentive for resource efficiency if you're not paying the true cost for the resources that we're using. And what you can see here from this study from the CDP is that already 15% of the companies that report to CDP already set up an internal carbon price, and 21% will set up one in the next 2 years. So these are two ways you can look at how sustainability can reduce costs. So one example is by looking at the cost of renewables, and the other one is by setting up internal prices for the raw materials and the resources that you use to make sure that you are driving the right efficiencies internally. One case study that we like to share here at How Good, we've been working with a dairy-free ice cream product developer, and they wanted to discover the sustainability and financial impact of switching suppliers. And while assessing financial impact was relatively straightforward, they didn't really have a way to assess sustainability impact, and that's why they worked with How Good. And one of the key results was that they discovered that moving from the organic tapioca syrup to organic rice syrup from this specific supplier would improve the overall sustainability impact, with the highest gains being seen on labor risk. And in addition, by shifting their supplier, they would get approximately $500,000 in cost savings. And so sustainability can help you find new ingredients that potentially can also hopefully enable cost savings opportunities. So section 1, we've just covered 3 examples. So now we're going to go into the section 3. And in the section 2, we're going to be looking at how sustainability can grow revenue. So one of the studies that we often mention here at How Good is a study by the New York University and IRI. And they've been using point of sale data to assess over 250,000 different products across all channels in the US since 2014. And one of the things that they found out was that sustainability marketed products are growing faster than conventionally marketed products. So in fact, they are growing twice as fast based on the 6-year compound annual growth rate. And also they are able to charge a price premium on average of 28%. You can see that the price premium has reduced, in part due to the pandemic and to the inflationary pressures that we're facing today, but still is significant and sitting at 28%. And because of this, it's no surprise that we're seeing the share of sustainability marketed products overall growing. So in 2015, 14% of all products in the US were sustainability marketed. Now we're at 17%. And this trend is set to continue, as we're seeing that as of 2021, 48% of the new products that were launched were somehow sustainability marketed. So what we're seeing, and because this is based on point of sale data, we're looking not just at kind of what people say they do, but actually what, we're looking at real purchasing behavior. This is really good news in terms of, the consumer's ability to pay more and to search for sustainable offerings. And we're actually also seeing the same thing here at How Good. During the last 8 years, we've been working with a global retailer that when we started, they were interested in assessing the sustainability impact of 40,000 products. And they wanted to highlight what were the best performing products so they could boost online and in-store sales of those sustainable products. And so as part of this, How Good assessed the sustainability impact of all these products. And we produce sustainability attributes and ratings that are being used today, both online as part of the e-commerce filtering system and also in-store. And you can see a picture here on the left-hand side. And what we found out was that products that have our highest sustainability rating had a 234 sales uplift. And these meant a $600,000 average increase in sales of the products that qualified for this rating. Now, of course, a significant part of this growth is generating cannibalization, right? Consumers are probably shifting from one product to the other. But also what we're seeing is that because sustainability products have higher margins, often that shift translates into better profit margins for retailers. And also, we also recognize that that cannibalization is probably needed to drive the green transition that we so desperately need. So we've looked at both the downside and the upside tangibles. So what are the things that we can do from in terms of articulating a business case that goes into those two buckets? But now let's go into that intangible section, right? How can sustainability mitigate risk? And in this case, there are many multiple ways for us to look at risk. Definitely, the purpose of this presentation is not to, to cover all possible different ways of risk. Specifically, we're going to be looking at legal risk. So when we look at legal risk, what we're seeing is since 2005, the number of ESG regulations increased 429%. So currently there are 868 regulations on sustainability. Some of them are connected to deforestation, and many of you here on the call probably already heard about many of these directives, the CSRD, the CSDD, and all these different acronyms of legislation coming from the European Union to harmonize and standardize sustainability claims and sustainability reporting. A lot of these regulations, like for example, the deforestation regulation, come with fines for non-compliance. And these fines are framed in terms of percentage of annual revenue. So you can see how, from a perspective of legal risk, there is a huge impact that non-addressing this sustainability legislation can have on the company's bottom line. At the same time, we're also seeing the number of climate change litigation cases increasing. So since 2010, in the last decade, basically, the number of global climate change litigation cases have increased 262%. And so sustainability claims are definitely under more scrutiny than ever before. And I was just seeing a news, today, how, for example, JBS, the meat producer from Brazil, agreed to stop making certain claims about carbon neutrality after an investigation by the National Advertising Division. And so a lot of these things are in the news and are coming as we speak. And this is not a remote risk. These are things that are affecting companies in real time today. Here at How Good, one of the ways we've been looking at risks is by looking at if there are regulations that mandate companies to sustainability, to create and calculate their impact and report them externally. It's becoming more and more important to make sure that that data reflects as granularly their supply system as possible. So we've been working recently with a global food service company that, until working with How Good, they were using global averages to calculate their Scope 3 emissions. But they recognized that global averages were often not very representative of their actual real impacts. And their supply system could be different, and global averages often did not represent that. And so they've been working with How Good to calculate location and crop specific emission factors that reflect in much more granular way their supply system. And as a result, they have higher sustainability, that granularity. They make sure that their Scope 3 reporting is aligned to the guidance of the Science Based Targets Initiative. And as part of this work, they were able to make corrections in some emissions factors for some ingredients that were bloated by 900%. And so basically, as more regulation comes in, we need to make sure that the data that we're putting out there really can survive the scrutiny of our consumers and external stakeholders. And finally, the section 4 is looking at how sustainability can drive differentiation. I included here, in this image, in this video that you're seeing here, the example of Tesla. which I think it's an interesting example of how a change in technology and the company can potentially support large-scale sustainability impact change through sustainability by measuring, connecting it with other outcomes. And within this context, what we're seeing here from a differentiation perspective, we've been, I don't know if you're familiar with this research here on the left-hand side from the McKinsey and Company and also Nielsen IQ. They've basically assessed hundreds of thousands of products, also based on point of sale data. And this report is from 2023. And one of the things that they found out was that brands that have more of their sales coming from products that make ESG related claims enjoy greater loyalty. So for example, you see that brands that had less than 20% of sales coming from ESG products were enjoying a 27% repeat rate, but brands that had 80% of sales coming from ESG products were able to have a repeat rate of 34%. We're also seeing that sustainability can support innovation. And so environment-related patents filed under the IPC have grown 205% in the last 20 years. And this really shows that sustainability is becoming more and more interest from that intangible perspective. Other ways that we're also seeing, in my conversations with CFOs across, a series of food companies, and one of the things that we see is just this concern about attracting talent. And a lot of companies that have less than ideal sustainability performance are really struggling in their capacity to attract young talent to continue and to work at the company. And this feeling from a lot of the C-suite is also reflected in the data that we're seeing, in this case, in this study from 2020, where we're seeing that companies that have better ESG scores tend to have more satisfied employees, and companies that have better ESG scores also have a more attractive image among young talent. One of the examples that we can share here from a company that we worked with here at How Good is Tractor Beverages. Maybe some of the Tractor Beverages team members are here on the call, and if so, hello everybody. Tractor had the objective of, Tractor basically discovered that, based on a survey, that many of the consumers in the United States were concerned about the presence of synthetic pesticide residues in their food, and that 69% of them were interested in seeing how their beverage choice impacts the planet. And so Tractor has been working with How Good and one of our favorite agronomists, Dr. Stephanie, to measure the impact of their organically sourced beverages and to compare it to conventional alternatives. And as a result, Tractor was able to become the first beverage in the US to disclose impact data about its organic certified beverages, and really talking about how organic certified beverages versus conventional beverages are able to save on greenhouse gas emissions, reduce water pollution. They're able to support much more organic land, improve soil health, and reduce the presence of synthetic pesticides in our system. And so this really helped the companies support their commitment to transparency and sustainable sourcing and respond to the consumer demand for environmental sustainability. And so again, this is one more example of how sustainability, in this case, an organically certified beverage company, can use sustainability to create differentiation in the marketplace versus the most conventional and established players. So that was a lot. So we covered those 4 buckets. And so how is it that we can move from CSR to ROI? When we look at ROI, we're typically very good at measuring how much we invest, right? That's super tangible, but we're not very good typically at measuring returns. And the 2 biggest gaps that we see from a returns perspective is measuring that side of those intangible returns, and also in terms of measuring not just the financial returns, but also the impact returns. And that has been, the ability to measure impact returns has been where How Good has been focusing on for the last 15 years. You can see in this video, a video of our Lattice platform, where you can see, in this case, the formulation of a yogurt, where we can quickly assess, using our technology, the sustainability impact across many ingredients from multiple sourcing locations. And it's very easy to export reports. And so what would be a 9 months endeavor to calculate a GG impact report for a specific product becomes an exercise of a couple of minutes using the How Good system. And we're doing this because we believe that if we are to, really support the green transition, then we need to make sure that, the change makers that are here on this call can spend less time measuring and more time doing what matters the most, which is driving real action on the ground. And of course, before we go into the Q&A, we didn't want to end this presentation without questioning the business case. And so there are this framework from the regenerative thinking school, and specifically from the Carol Sanford Institute, called the 4 paradigms of thinking. And for the purpose of this presentation, I adapted this framework to what are the paradigms of thinking that we can use when we're making the case for sustainability. When you're making the case for sustainability with your colleagues at your company, with your C-suite, with the board, how is it that you're making the case? And the goal of this framework is not so much to tell us how to think or how we should think, because that's really your decision, right? The purpose of this framework is to bring consciousness into how we decide to think about how we make the case for sustainability in business. And there are 4 paradigms that we could potentially use to make the case for sustainability. And these are the 4 paradigms that you see here. I'm going to start from the one that is at the bottom and then go up gradually. So the first one is extract value. And here the focus is really, how is it that I can use sustainability to extract and gain the most value? And so you would present to your C-suite and your executive suite from that lens, and basically saying, hey, if we adopt these sustainability initiatives, this is how much we have to gain, and this is how it would impact our company's market value. The other approach is to think about doing less harm. So here the focus is less to be like, you recognize that it's not everything about how to gain the most value, but that there are problems that the company is generating, externalities that you're facing that you need to solve. So when we're using the do less harm paradigm, typically we focus on problems. These problems can be, for example, deforestation, or can be, for example, greenhouse gas emissions. And our focus when we're operating from this paradigm becomes, how can we make the problems less bad? And so in that case, what I might do is I'm going to commit to maybe net zero deforestation, or I'm going to commit to reduce my scope 3 emissions by 50%. And all of that is great. But again, what you're focusing on is on problems, and you're focusing on making those problems less bad. The other paradigm that we can use is the net positive, or the do good paradigm. And I think here at this level, you start making the case for sustainability, not just in terms of problems to be solved, or not just in terms of how much you can gain from them, but in terms of what is the positive impact that you think your function and your company can have on the planet and society. And then at that paradigm, the regenerative paradigm, what you do is to not so much kind of focus into, how you can gain the most value, or, problems to be solved, or areas where you want to explicitly drive positive impact. but really your focus is to invite agency through self-reflection. It's really about working with your executive team, your board, your suppliers, in ways that invite their personal agency, that invite them to image their own effects, the effects that their decisions have on living systems around them, and in nurturing their sense of agency to see and materialize new potential to advance better outcomes in ways that are not prescriptive, that are maybe do not necessarily rely on best practices, certifications, or standards, but that really rely on the unique landscape and the unique needs of the business and the stakeholders that you work with. And at this moment, I would love to just ask you a couple of questions. You know, when you look at, the last month or so, when you've had to make a case for sustainability, what paradigm, what would you say is the predominant paradigm that you're operating from? Is it maybe the extract value, the dual SRM, the net positive, the regenerative? And I would also like to invite you to think of how would it be different if you were to source from other paradigms and not just that one that you're currently sourcing from. So if you're sourcing a lot from the extract value paradigm, what would it look like to bring elements of the sustainability of these other paradigms into how you make the case for sustainability? If you're using the net positive or the dual SRM, what it would look like to bring some of the elements of the other paradigms. These paradigms are not necessarily mutually exclusive. They're also not necessarily right or wrong. They're just different ways to look at how you can make the case for sustainability. And I would argue that when we think about what is the business case of sustainability, we're still thinking about that paradigm, the extract value, which is really focused on how much we can gain from a sustainability initiative. And I would say there's so much we can gain from broadening how we think about how we make the case for sustainability to encompass and invite agency and self-reflection beyond maybe the immediate gains that a company can get from it. And so, in summary, Earth's life support systems are at risk. The food system is a key driver of impact, and there is a business case for investing in sustainability. We've seen that sustainability initiatives can reduce costs, they can grow revenue, they can mitigate risks, and they can drive differentiation. And that articulating this business case really requires us to cultivate the capability to measure not just what's tangible, but hopefully some of those intangibles, and also not just financial returns, but also impact returns. And we've also reflected how, maybe thinking only of the business case is perhaps a restrictive way to think about the role of business, and how other paradigms can help us and invite new energy and to uncover and materialize new potential that we maybe did not see before. I would also like to make the case that sourcing from other paradigms also maybe requires hope. And there is this poem that I love from Václav Havel. He was he was a Czech poet and one of the presidents of the Czech Republic. And he wrote this poem about hope while he was in prison. And he talked about hope not so much as prognostication, but as a state of mind. He talked about hope as an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. He said that hope is not the same thing as optimism. He saw optimism as the expectation based on the number of facts that things will turn out well, while he saw hope as a certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. And so in times as crucial as ours today, where we are at a crossroads of a series of crises from both a geopolitical and sustainability point of view, the invite is really for us to hope, not as a prognostication, but as an orientation of the spirit and of the heart. So the question from Amanda from New Hope. Hi, Amanda. Are the intangibles becoming more defined though? They become new metrics and indicators to measure. Yeah, that's the issue with intangibles, right? They can be easily quantified because from an accounting point of view, what you do is just you subtract the book value from the market value. And that's basically what you cannot explain through the book value. But there are probably some frameworks to account for intangibles that I'm not aware of because I'm not an accountant. But I think the possibility there is we have the freedom to do some of that work and to quantify some of those intangibles. And even if we don't have a unified standard today, we can start and measuring some of those intangibles to make the business case today. And thank you for everyone who's dropping messages in the chat. I'm glad that you enjoyed your time. And if there are no other questions, not only we covered a lot of stuff today, but also we're going to give you back 13 minutes so you can drive action and do something good in your day today. So thank you so much for joining. Have a great rest of week and stay in touch. And let's drive the green transition together. Bye.